that breaking up routines. I really like the term. I don't know if you'd used it before or whatever, but it's a nice way to describe it, right?
It is, absolutely. All of our routines were changed during COVID. So one routine that I personally had, and my routine was come to the gym, work out, have a chat with a few folks. But that routine was changed because all the fitness centers and gyms were closed. So it was introducing new practices and habits. So
All right, Michael Fraccaro, welcome to Rolling Stories. I really appreciate you making the time. We've caught you at just after 8 a.m. in the morning, New York time, and you said you were in the office this morning, bright and early.
I am. So thank you, Phil. Thanks for the invitation. I'm glad to be here.
Well, again, like I said, thanks for making the time, because I mean, of all the people I know, you must be the most super busiest. But as I do when we start these podcasts, let's just go over quickly, Michael Fraccaro. I mean, we were just talking about your background, but financial services, Australia, HSBC, then Mastercard. Give us the quick 1 minute of your career.
Yeah, the quick 1 minute. Graduated from university. Was a high school teacher. That was my first job out of university. So secondary high school, co-educational school in Sydney. Taught the social sciences, and then about 3.5 years later, found myself working in the technology industry, but financial services. So I joined a company called Cuscal, Credit Union Services Corporation. Joined as a training manager, and then progressed through to more broader generalist HR. But I had such a passion for human resources at an early stage. But I also wanted to get some international experience. So I moved to Saudi Arabia with the family for a couple of years, and worked for a large bank there. Came back to Australia, and then loved being in Australia. But I said I need to go international again, and then found myself in Hong Kong with HSBC, where I spent 12 years. Fast forward to 2012, and then found myself here in New York, joining Mastercard. And then in 2016 was appointed as the Chief Human Resource Officer here at Mastercard. So it's been a great time. Feel privileged and honoured to be in this role and with this company.
Indeed. I mean, such a well-known company, of course. The topic today is well-being. Well-being's got such a bunch of descriptions about it, but quite simply, let's start the discussion off with how you would describe well-being in its broadest terms.
Every year I do a presentation to the board, but there's one segment that I do is always looking ahead and saying what potentially could be a disruptor to Mastercard, and particularly the culture. One of the potential disruptors was about well-being, and I was beginning to see patterns where people were talking about burnout. People were talking about meeting overload. Fast forward, obviously, into 2020, and you get into COVID. You get into this global pandemic, and so that was really the start of really getting the attention not only of the board but the management as well. That this is a real issue, and that this is something that we need to do, because if we don't, it'll have an adverse impact in the way that we talk about our employees, which is all about a caring organization. But it also impacts productivity, and it also impacts culture. And so those things obviously gets the attention of leadership around what do we need to do. And so that was sort of the genesis of it.
When we spoke before, Michael, you had a nice term also about describing well-being as breaking up routines. That breaking up routines, I really like the term. I don't know if you'd used it before or whatever, but it's a nice way to describe it, right?
It is, absolutely. All of our routines were changed during COVID. So one routine that I personally had, and my routine was come to the gym, work out, have a chat with a few folks. But that routine was changed because all the fitness centers and gyms were closed. So it was introducing new practices and habits. So I started things like finding breathing apps or yoga and stretching and doing other things that allowed me to continue to exercise, but it was a new routine that I've started. The other thing that I know that happens with a lot of people as well, when you're in jobs where you've got a lot of pressure, quite often your mind is racing at night, and sometimes you find it hard to sleep. I know I do. And so one of the simple habits that I learned was, before you go to bed, is just to write down what are the 4 or 5 things that you need to do the following day. And by that simple practice, it actually takes it away from it swirling in your mind, because you've actually already documented on a paper. And then when you start the next day, you don't have the anxiety around what do I need to do. And the other one is gratitude. A simple habit, but every day. And I know, Phil, you might say, well, this is a bit corny, but every day I write 3 lines of gratitude to my wife. I text her, I say, hey May, I'm grateful for this, I'm grateful for that. 3 things every day. It's little things like that that we can all do, that don't cost anything, but are very, very helpful and impactful for maintaining some level of balance in your life.
Okay, so some personal routines there. We'll just dive back into some of the Mastercard things then. I mean, the things like the summer and winter afternoon, and the no meeting Fridays and things like that. Did Mastercard flip into that automatically, part of the culture, or did you have some grumbles along the way with some of those kinds of things?
You firstly have to outline what is the problem that you're trying to solve. You need to back it up with some data, and we did a lot of listening with our employees through pulse surveys and focus groups. And then we put in place some recommendations and said, look, this is how we see the way that we can respond to some of the issues that we're hearing from our employees. And giving some time back and flexibility is an important part of what we can do to support them.
Okay. And I know one of the other things you mentioned was about allowing employees, if possible, to work in their home country for a month a year. Now, as you rightly said, I mean, call center staff and sales staff, there's some flexibility there. But the principle is that you guys have implemented is that, if possible, someone can go work in their home country for a month, right?
That's right. So we saw a lot of people during the pandemic travel back to their home city or their home location, their home country, and have stayed there. And having the additional family support around, particularly if you've got children, spending time with the grandparents or the in-laws actually provides that natural family support. The other part, obviously, was clearly safety, and people fled from areas where there was high levels of COVID infection rates to areas where it was less problematic. So we said, hey, what else can we be doing? And so we came up with this idea around 4 weeks work from anywhere during the year. And so, as you know, and you can tell from my accent, I'm from Sydney, right, Australia. So if I plan to go back to Sydney and I go there for a holiday, right, to visit family, which I'm planning to do, by the way, I can literally stay there up to 4 weeks in addition to whatever I've got planned for my holiday, and work from there. And so that's a pretty good benefit to provide to our employees, giving them that flexibility. And you would say, okay, what about if you're a contact center, a customer call center? There is so much technology there that it doesn't matter where you sit anymore. You can still be a contact center agent regardless of where you are. So allowing these kinds of things as well just acknowledges this point about family care, support, flexibility. And it's something that we believe in very, very much. Yeah.
Am I right in saying that COVID has, by accident, proven that those models can work effectively? So I guess that cements the thinking that on an ongoing basis, COVID hopefully is in the rear vision mirror now. But now ways of working going forward, we can sustain, as you said, those remote workers very easily.
Absolutely. I mean, the other thing is, in Europe, let's say in London, there are people that are commuting 2 hours one way to get into central London to go to work, right? So that's 4 hours a day, and people are saying, why? I could be spending those 4 hours actually working. it's actually thrown up a lot of new ways of thinking in terms of what is the purpose of going into an office. And part of it is about collaboration, innovation, co-creating. And so a lot of organizations, us ourselves, we're also working through what are we going to do when we get people back into the office. But if it's actually you're bringing people back to work on a problem or to build the network, you've just got to find other ways and make it meaningful when people are coming back into the office, that they actually get value from it. And there is tremendous value in bringing people together. I mentioned earlier, Phil, that we had our board meeting, our first in-person board meeting in New York on Monday and Tuesday this week. There's a power in when people are together, but not just in the room. It's also the benefit of all of the water cooler or the spontaneous connections that you're finding with people just because you are together. And so working with the hybrid model, some working at home, some in the office, I think that is sort of the secret key to what's going to be the future for us.
To wrap up the well-being thing, the last thing I remember you saying, Michael, is well-being as a leadership competency now, and some of the work Mastercard has done to build it into the leadership competency and leadership development model. Just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so yes, we've definitely now built in a component, a module of well-being in all our leadership programs, because the leaders need to be aware of the science and the data. So there's like 5 building blocks that we've got in terms of how we're building it into our leadership programs. One is really just to increase awareness and knowledge around what is mental well-being and what is resilience, what does it mean and why it's so important. The second piece is around strengthen the self-care and the self-regulation. So you think about the idea of when you're getting the safety briefing on an aircraft, they basically say, okay, if there's a drop in air pressure, the mask will drop. Make sure you cover your own nose and mouth and start breathing before you help the person next to you. We encourage role modeling. So some of those examples I mentioned earlier about showing vulnerability and leaders talking about their own personal story around how they're dealing with issues from day to day. It's an important part of the leadership role. And then the last two is really around how do you increase support for your team, both mental and physical health, and then how you use this to drive culture change in the organization. So they're sort of the 5 things that we have that we cover off in our well-being programs and in our leadership curriculum.
If you had to sort of offer a few learnings, whether that is if I had my time again, or 2 or 3 things in terms of direction for other companies that were considering expanding their well-being viewpoint and well-being practices, what things would spring to mind?
Yeah, probably 2 things. One is really looking at this through the lens of at an organizational level. So to get your chief financial officer and your CEO bought into this, you really need to present the facts and why this is important. So raising it to that organizational level is extremely important. I was fortunate enough to have that with our CEO, because that link between organizational resilience, culture, business performance is super, super important. But also, the role of leadership in this topic is hugely important, and it can't be underestimated. And so linking it to the future of work, I think, is also another big piece. And then the final part is around the individual component. So you've got the organizational level, but then think about what is it that's really important at the individual level. And I think this whole notion about well-being, resilience, thinking about daily practices in an organization as well of what you could be doing differently. So, for example, the one thing I probably would have done even more is lent in on the meeting culture, right? Most companies got a meeting culture. Everything is a meeting. And I think had I known where we were going to land in 2020 with the pandemic, I would have started already changing, this notion that every decision has to be through a meeting. So how can we collaborate? How can we make decisions in organizations without having to call 30 people and getting people into a room and making sure that we're choreographing people's calendars. I think there's a much better way to do it. And I think those are the things that probably would have done differently. And I think we haven't yet cracked that nut, but we're on our way.
Well, Michael, just as we finish up, then I've got just a few questions of levity to end our talk. Got a couple of thought-provoking questions. One is actually one of my favorites. As a leader, what is the main thing you judge a candidate on when you interview?
The main thing is really around, does this person bring something to the table that complements, me or my team? So someone that comes into the team that has some, powerful strength, towering strength is certainly what I'm always looking for. But a sense of humility and this curiosity to learn. So they're sort of the three things that I look for in individuals.
Okay, I read an article in it, and it said the hypothesis was that 10% of employees shape the culture of an entire organization. Do you agree?
I don't know if I'd agree with that comment, but I do know it can work the opposite direction. And you have to be constantly listening to your employees, and even the silent minority. Be very vigilant around. It's just important, the things that people say with the things that's not being said as well. And I think that's an important part of as we're going through this cultural shift. Look, I had many highlights, but I would say that the landing this job was just an amazing way it happened. So, and I'm talking about when I got into the Chief Human Resource Officer job in 2016, because I wasn't expecting it, Phil. I came here, I knew I was on a succession plan, but it literally happened like this. It was a Monday afternoon. I got a phone call from the CEO's office. He said, "Look, can you come and see me?" I thought maybe I'm in trouble. Maybe he wanted some feedback on something. I didn't know what it was. So I walked down to his office. He sat me down. We started, exchanging pleasantries. And he said, "How would you like to be the next CHRO of Mastercard?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, of course. I'd love to sometime." And he said, "Okay, what about tomorrow?" And I said, "What?" It was both a moment of, oh my gosh, as well as, wow, this is it, And so that was probably the most elated moment I had.
I really appreciate it. I know you didn't have to do this. Some really interesting stuff there. Thank you very much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Phil. Enjoyed the conversation.